In a small, quiet town nestled between rolling hills, the air was still, carrying with it a touch of nostalgia. The sky was clear, the sun just beginning to dip behind the trees, casting a golden glow over the scene. It was the kind of peaceful evening that made everything feel like it was standing still. Inside a modest, worn-down house, a man moved slowly through the attic. His name was John, and he was a veteran of a war long past. Years had passed since his uniform was last worn, but the memories attached to it hadn't faded. He'd recently moved into this home, hoping the change of scenery might bring some peace to his restless heart. Surrounded by boxes stacked high, John sifted through the remnants of his past, a clutter of photos, medals, trophies, and old uniforms, each item stirring memories of days that felt like a lifetime ago. He paused as his fingers brushed against the familiar fabric of his uniform, the once crisp and proud attire now faded and worn from years of storage. It was strange to think of how much time had passed since he'd last worn it, how many years he had spent moving from place to place, trying to escape the weight of what he had experienced. His family had moved away long ago, and now it was just him, alone, in a house full of things he didn't quite know how to connect with. Sorting through these remnants, John couldn't help but feel the distance from the world around him, like he was living in a time that wasn't quite his own. John's fingers lingered on the edges of his old uniform, the fabric worn and soft to the touch, like a memory that had settled into the fibers. As he carefully folded the sleeves back, something unusual caught his attention. At the bottom of the right pocket, tucked neatly against the lining, was an envelope. It was old, the paper yellowed and fragile, as though it had been there for years, forgotten and hidden from view. The handwriting on the front was unfamiliar, a delicate script he couldn't place. His name, John, was written in a flowing, careful style that felt oddly intimate. The seal on the back of the envelope had once been strong, though now it was just a faint trace of wax. His heart skipped a beat. How had he missed this? How could something so important have gone unnoticed for so long? The envelope looked like it had been sealed with care, as if the sender had put everything they had into it. But he had no recollection of it, no memory of receiving it or even seeing it before. The feeling of curiosity washed over him, but it was mixed with uncertainty. What if this was something he wasn't supposed to find? What if it was a part of a past he had buried too deeply? For a moment he just stared at the envelope, his hands trembling slightly as he turned it over. He had no idea what to expect, but the pull to open it was too strong. Slowly, carefully, he slid his finger under the flap, his breath held tight in his chest. As the envelope came open, a letter slid out, the paper smooth and crisp, the ink still dark and legible. John sat down on the dusty wooden floor, his heart pounding in his chest. He unfolded the letter, bracing himself for whatever it might reveal. John unfolded the letter with trembling hands, the words written in a neat flowing script that seemed almost too perfect, too careful. As he read, the familiar scent of the paper and the ink seemed to pull him into another time, another place, a time he had long buried deep inside. The letter was from Ellen, a woman he had known well during his service, a woman he had confided in, shared his darkest moments with. She had been his anchor during the worst of times, a friend who understood the pain of war in ways few others could. But what the letter revealed was something that stopped John's breath cold. The first few lines were filled with affection, as though Ellen had always known that someday they would be reunited. But then the truth slowly unfurled before him. Ellen had been in love with him, the words echoed in his mind, unable to escape. She had quietly carried that love for years, hiding it beneath the surface of their friendship. During his deployment, she had written to him over and over again, letters filled with hope and longing, but those letters never reached him. The chaos of war had claimed them, lost in the shuffle of battlefield memories, or maybe never even sent at all. The letter continued, and John's heart sank deeper into his chest. Ellen had waited for him, she had held on to the belief that one day he would return to her. But when he finally did come home, it wasn't the man she remembered. There had been no word, no explanation, nothing to explain his sudden disappearance. She had tried to contact him, called the few numbers she knew, but all her attempts had been met with silence. John had simply vanished from her life without a trace. A chill ran down his spine as he read the next part. The letter hinted at a secret, something John had never fully confronted. The truth was there, buried beneath years of silence and regret. Ellen had never given up on him. She had believed in him, in the future they could have had, even when everything had gone wrong. But John had cut off all contact, not because he didn't care, but because something had happened during those final days of his deployment, something he had buried so deep that he couldn't even bring himself to remember it. As the words sank in, a wave of guilt washed over John, pulling him under like a heavy tide. He had always thought that Ellen had moved on, that she had gotten over him. But now, reading her words, he understood the truth of how much she had cared for him, how much she had loved him, even after everything they had both been through. The years of regret and confusion he had carried with him felt like a crushing weight. How could he have been so blind? How could he have never seen the depth of Ellen's feelings for him? He had been consumed by his own pain and fear, too caught up in the shadows of war to recognize what was right in front of him. Now, in the silence of the attic, the weight of the past seemed unbearable, the time they had lost, the love that had been left unspoken. It was all so painfully clear. John sat there, staring at the letter, his heart torn between grief for the lost time, regret for his own actions, and a deep aching sorrow for the woman who had waited for him, only to be left alone. The letter lingered in John's mind, pulling him into a storm of questions and confusion. He couldn't rest, not after reading Ellen's words. He had to know what had really happened, what had caused him to leave her behind without a word. Ellen's love had been true, but so much of their story had been lost to time, buried beneath layers of silence and forgotten memories. Determined to find answers, John spent days digging through his old military records. He sifted through dusty folders, hoping to find a clue, anything that could explain the events of those final days in the war. The reports, the mission logs, and the names of his fellow soldiers, all blended together in a haze of incomprehensible details. Nothing seemed to make sense, but there was one thing he couldn't shake, the nagging feeling that something important had been hidden, something he had never been told. Frustrated, John reached out to his old comrades, hoping for some insight. Each conversation left him with more questions than answers. Some spoke vaguely, others didn't seem to remember the details, and a few just outright avoided the subject. They all had different versions of what had happened during the final mission, each one more confusing than the last. But John wasn't about to give up. There had to be someone who knew the truth. Finally, after days of searching, John found Mark. Mark had been by his side through it all, the good and the bad. Mark was someone John trusted, someone who had witnessed the same things he had. John hoped Mark could finally shed some light on the darkness that had clouded his memories. Mark's voice was heavy with the weight of old secrets as they sat down together. As John told him about the letter from Ellen, Mark's expression grew solemn. After a long pause, Mark leaned forward, his eyes meeting John's with a somber look. "Ellen, she wasn't just waiting for you," Mark said, his voice low. "She was in an accident, a bad one, while you were away." John's heart skipped a beat as he listened, struggling to comprehend the words. Mark continued, telling him that Ellen had been caught in a tragic event shortly after John had left. She had been injured badly, and though she survived, it had taken a long time for her to heal, physically and emotionally. But that wasn't all. Mark paused, his eyes flickering with a mixture of anger and regret. He revealed something that John had never known. The accident had been caused by a betrayal within their own unit. Another soldier, Nathan, had been involved, someone who had secretly harbored feelings for Ellen. Nathan had sabotaged the mission, setting up the chain of events that led to Ellen's accident. He had manipulated the situation, using his position to isolate her from John. Nathan had wanted to keep Ellen away from John, believing that if he could do that, she would eventually turn to him instead. The betrayal had been buried, swept under the rug to protect the reputation of those involved. But Mark couldn't keep the secret any longer. John sat in stunned silence, the truth slowly sinking in. He had been a pawn in a game he had never even realized was being played. The betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, all of it had been hidden from him. His entire relationship with Ellen, everything he thought he knew, had been tainted by this cruel twist of fate. The weight of the truth settled heavily on John's chest. As the days passed, the shock of what he had learned slowly turned into something deeper, something darker. The betrayal, the pain, the years of silence, all of it was now a sharp, constant ache in his heart. He couldn't escape the guilt that consumed him. How had he not seen the signs? How could he have been so blind to Ellen's suffering? He had always thought of her as a friend, someone who had been there to listen, to support him. But the truth was so much more. She had loved him, and he had never even noticed. John's mind replayed the years he had spent away from her, each moment like a heavy chain around his neck. The guilt gnawed at him, relentless. He had been so wrapped up in his own struggles, so lost in his pain, that he hadn't been able to see hers. She had waited for him, hoping for a future that would never come, and he had left her behind, without a word, without an explanation. He had vanished, as though he never cared, but he had cared more than she would ever know. And now it was too late to tell her. Sitting in his quiet home, John couldn't escape the haunting images of Ellen's face, of her waiting for him, of the life they could have shared. He wondered if somewhere deep inside, she had ever forgiven him for disappearing without a trace. Had she ever understood the pain he had been in? Had she ever known how much he had wanted to return to her, to make things right? The regret weighed heavily on him, and there were days when he felt as though he might suffocate under the burden of what could have been. The memories of the time they had lost together were like a ghost, following him wherever he went. He could see her smile, hear her laugh, feel the warmth of her presence, and yet it was all just a distant fading echo. He wished, more than anything, that he could go back to the moment before he disappeared. He would stay, he would have fought for her, for them. But time, as it always does, had moved forward, and now all that remained were the memories and the letter she had written, the final words of a love that had never truly been given a chance. John was sitting in his dimly lit living room, lost in the tangled web of his thoughts, when the phone rang. He wasn't expecting anyone, and the sound of the old receiver breaking the silence sent a jolt of tension through him. His fingers trembled as he picked it up, pressing it to his ear. "Hello?" A soft, unfamiliar voice greeted him, gentle but steady. "Is this John?" the voice asked. John's heart skipped. "Yes, this is John. Who is this?" "My name is Sarah," the woman replied. "I'm Mel's daughter. I hope it's not a bad time." The words hit John like a wave. Ellen's daughter? His mind raced, and for a moment he didn't know how to respond. "Ellen, she's gone," Sarah continued softly. "I've been going through her things and I found something I think you should see." John's pulse quickened. He sat up straighter, his mind reeling. Sarah explained that her mother had kept a box filled with letters, photos, and mementos of John all these years, memories of the love she had never forgotten, of a man she had always hoped would return. Then, Sarah dropped the bombshell that would change everything. "Before she passed, my mom wrote one last letter to you," Sarah said, her voice trembling slightly. "She never sent it. She believed that you would come back to her one day. She never gave up on you." John felt his breath catch. A last letter. Everything he had believed about the past, about Ellen's love, was suddenly turned upside down. The letter, the final words he had never received, were out there waiting to explain everything. Sarah's voice softened again. "I'd like to send you that letter. I think it's time you finally read it." John stood there speechless, as a flood of emotions overtook him: hope, sorrow, and a new sense of closure. For the first time in years, he felt a weight lift off his shoulders. John sat quietly, holding the letter in his hands, feeling a deep, bittersweet sense of peace wash over him. The words written by Ellen, words he had never gotten to hear in life, now brought him the closure he had been searching for all these years. Though the pain of loss still lingered, it no longer felt all-consuming. The guilt, the regret, the unanswered questions, they no longer defined him. Ellen had never given up on him, and in the end, she had found a way to speak to him, even after all this time. It was a heavy moment, filled with sorrow for the years they had lost, but it also held something else, something John hadn't expected. It was the sense of peace that came with understanding. He realized that some things in life were beyond his control, that the past couldn't be changed, no matter how much he wished otherwise. But in that understanding, he could let go of the weight he had carried for so long. In the weeks that followed, John began to rebuild. He started volunteering at a local veterans center, offering his time and wisdom to those who, like him, had faced the horrors of war. It gave him a new purpose, a chance to give back and find meaning in helping others heal. Though Ellen was gone, her love and memory remained with him, a quiet presence that guided him in his new path. John had spent so many years lost in the shadows of his past, but now he understood something important. Life didn't always follow the path we expected. It didn't always offer second chances, but sometimes, it gave us new beginnings. And for John, it was never too late to find peace, redemption, and maybe even a sense of hope for the future. Thank you for watching this deeply emotional journey of love, regret, and redemption. John's story is a reminder that sometimes, the truth can change everything, and that it's never too late to find peace, even after years of pain. We hope this story touched your heart as much as it did ours. If you enjoyed this tale and want to see more, don't forget to like, comment, and share with others who might need to hear it. Your support helps us bring more stories like this to life, and if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so you never miss out on our latest videos. We'd love to hear your thoughts and connect with you in the comments below. Thanks for being part of our community, and we'll see you in the next story.